Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to use this intricate Daisies foil and die set from Simon Says Stamp. A few weeks ago, I got a Crafty parcel from their Black Friday sale and opened it, and this was one of the things that were in it. I'm going to use it with my Glimmer machine and this aura foil, as well as this little greenery stem from the sketched rosebud set from Simon Says Stamp. I have to do all of that plate because that greenery is part of it, but that's okay. We'll use the other pieces for something else. Now, the reason I'm using this now is this is a Daisies die or foil plate and die set, but I think if we change the color to red, it could look a little bit like a poinsettia or even like Christmas mums. So I just wanted to try this out. I wanted to hustle and get this video out before Christmas. I know a lot of people aren't gonna have the time to be sitting creating right now, but it's a way to look at your stamps, dies, foil plates in a little bit different way and just look at the shapes and not what they tell you it is. I know that this daisy doesn't look exactly like a poinsettia when you're looking at the different pieces, but I think if you color it a little bit different, you can get that kind of vibe. And I love doing this with other things as well. Like for instance, cardinal stamps and dies, I regularly will turn them into blue jays because they have a very similar shape to them. So I'm using my Glimmer machine here. It's all heated up. I'm using aura foil and I am working on hammermill cardstock. It's the best one that I have for doing the foiling. I put that foil on the pretty side of the foil to the plate on my hot machine, and then the cardstock on top of it, as well as my plates. Press the timer button, and once that timer button is solid and not blinking, it's ready to go through my die cutting machine. You need the Glimmer machine for the heat and you need the die cutting machine for the pressure. You have to do it with both of them. Sometimes you get a little bit of overfoiling and you can get a sand eraser to remove that, but I find that the sand eraser also dulls the foil. So I typically like to try a dry brush first or a foam brush first, and often that will get enough of that foil off that it looks a lot better. I'm doing several of these daisies. I want to have several of the smaller ones. I only want one of the big one really, but I want several of the smaller ones. My third try on these daisies, I got a lot of overfoiling. I probably should have waited for the foil to cool down just slightly. I think that might have helped, but I just used that small one from that one anyways, and I got as much of that extra foil off as I needed. Then I'm doing the greenery from the sketched rosebud. For all of these, I am doing both the positive and the negative foiling. I always like doing my negative foiling at the same time. That way I can toss any of the backing from the foil and not have to save it in order to do my solid foiling at another date. I'll regularly use that solid hot foiling to die cut pieces for other things, or else I use them for mats. If you see any of my foiling videos, I'll regularly use them as a mat behind the image of what I'm doing. For this one, I'm not using it for that. I am going to die cut the greenery as well as one of the daisies. I'll save any excess pieces for future projects or future die cutting and whatnot, but it's a great way to get the most use out of your foil as possible. When you're using the solid hot foil plate, I do let it sit for just a little bit longer just because it's a large plate and I want to make sure that it's nice and hot. But again, it's a great way to get as much use as possible out of your foil. And while you have that machine hot anyways, you might as well just do it then. It only takes a few extra minutes in order to get all of those done. So I did the first couple on screen, the rest of them I did off screen because it's the repeat of the same process. And once all of those pieces are foiled, I'm ready to start die cutting them. Now, when I do the greenery, because I had that piece of foil cut in half, you're going to see that split on the solid hot foil. That's totally fine. It's going to not make a difference once I do the die cutting. And again, once I'm using as much of that foil as possible. Once I'm done my foiling and before I do my die cutting, I'm going to do my ink blending on these pieces of cardstock. It's much easier to do it while that piece of cardstock is solid, so I'm just doing it now. For the green, I'm using bundled sage with peeled paint. I'm using a bigger blending brush for the bundled sage, and then I'm going to take a detailed blending brush and go in with the peeled paint, and I'm just going at the base of each one of the leaves. I do go along the stems. I'm not sure when I die cut how much of that green is going to be showing, and I want to make sure that that looks right between the base of the leaves and the stems. So I use that detail brush for that. By using the detail brush, I can make sure that I'm not getting as much of that darker green on than I did of the lighter green. And when I was doing the lighter green, I was trying to be careful not to get too much on those roses. Again, those roses are going to be saved for a future project. So I don't know what color I'm going to want them to be. If I knew right now, I would just ink them right now. For the daisies themselves, for the center of the daisy, I am using Fossilized Amber. And then when it comes to the reds for the ink blending, I'm first going to do Candy Apple, and it's going to go on the outside of those petals. Then I'm going to do Lumberjack Plaid, and it's going to go from the inside towards the outside, and then I'm going to do a detailed blending brush with aged mahogany. So I've got a bigger brush here that I'm doing for the Candied Apple, and I'm just going from the outside and flicking my way in. I'm not really doing the circular motion that you typically do with ink blending. I want most of this color to be on the tip of each one of those petals, and then I want it to have the darker colors towards the center of the petals. So I don't need to ink blend the entire thing. So I'm just getting that color on the outside. Once I have it done with the Candied Apple, I can go in with the Lumberjack Plaid. I'm using a detailed blending brush so that I can avoid the center of that flower and just kind of flick out. I do get a little bit on the Fossilized Amber. I'm not too worried about that. I have plans to put something else in the center anyway, so I just wanted a base of color there. So I'm just flicking out. I know that when I go in and do the aged mahogany, I want to do that there as well. So I'm trying to go out a little bit farther than I'm going to be going with the aged mahogany. And I just want to get a little bit of shading towards the center of that flower. Once that is done with all of those flowers, I can go in with that same brush and do the aged mahogany. And again, it's just going to deepen that shadow. I don't need to change brushes for this. The aged mahogany is darker. I'm not going to contaminate anything. And again, I'm doing the same motion, but I'm just flicking it out just a little bit less than I did with the Lumberjack Plaid. Once all of these flowers are completely colored, I can go in and match my dies with it and put it through my die cutting machine to cut each one of them out. And I love the fact that there are dies to match. It makes it so easy to cut things out. And even though that looked like a mess when I was coloring it, you never see that once it's die cut because you're cutting all that excess away. I do tape that die in place just to make sure that it doesn't shift. And then I tuck those flowers over to the side. So I'm going to die cut all of them. I'm also going to die cut my solid foiled ones. Now, when it comes to this, I'm more careful where I put that tape because that tape is going to mark that foil. And the larger scraps of that foil, I like to save them in my specialty paper bin, and I'll use them for die cutting like little ornaments or little accent pieces for different things. So I like to reuse that there as well. And I don't want to have that mark from the tape on there. So I am careful where I put the tape there, but I still tape it in place just to make sure it doesn't shift in the die cutting machine. Now I'm cutting the greenery. I'm going to tuck those roses to the side, save them for later, and I will also die cut the solid foiled greenery as well. A lot of times these flowers in the greenery, the solid pieces, are just nice for tucking in behind different areas of the design, just for a little bit of a metallic accent, and you'll see that when I start to layer everything together. For my card, I'm making a larger card. It's a 5x7 card because these flowers are fairly big. If I was only using one of them, I think I could easily do a 4 1/4 by 5.5. But because I want to use several of them, I thought it would be better to do a 5x7 card. And to do the mats, I'm using the 5x7 matting basic set from Spellbinders. It just makes it easier than cutting them myself, as well as the fact that I really like the edge of a die cut piece more than I like the edge of a piece that's cut with a trimmer or hand cut. So by using that matting basic set, I don't really have to think about it. It makes it super easy. Now, one of these layers, I want it to be red to coordinate with my flowers, and rather than going through my cardstock bits and trying to find the perfect red, the easiest way to do it is to use those ink pads that I used to ink those flowers and just ink along the edge. Now, this is the larger of the two mats that I cut, so the other one is going to go on top of this, so I don't need to ink the entire piece. I just need to ink enough that that other mat covers it. So that's going to save me time, and it also saves me time by not having to look through my cardstock pieces and try to find a perfect match. I glue that down, put my acrylic block on there to hold it all in place and free up my hands. And then I'm taking my gold Sharpie marker and doing a faux mat on the outside of the smaller of the two mats. This makes it look like I've got some gold underneath it, but much easier, and it takes a lot less layers this way. Gluing that one down, and once I put my acrylic block on, I noticed that the glue or the mat had shifted while I was putting that block down. So right away moving it, and already that glue had started to grab that cardstock. So you do want to make sure to correct that very quickly if that happens to you. While that acrylic block is on there, I always like to do my layouts on top of my card. But this way, when I move that acrylic block, I haven't lost where I've placed everything. I know exactly where everything is going to go. So I can move that to the side and still have my layout, although it did shift a little bit while I was lifting that up. I'm going to put my solid large poinsettia in the center just for placement. I'm not gluing that down quite yet. And then I'm going to glue down the smaller ones as well as the greenery pieces. Now those solid gold greenery pieces, I'm going to put those behind the outside of these smaller poinsettias. Once again, just for a little bit of gold accent and detail. This way I don't have to do as many of the ones where I ink blended in the green, and I think it looks really nice to have the combination of the two. It just gives it a little bit more interest to have some green leaves and some gold leaves, and because I have the gold accents from the foil as well as the solid foiled poinsettia that's going behind my large poinsettia, it ties everything in together. So a lot of these poinsettias I'm gluing down flat. Those two smaller ones I glued down flat. The solid and the colored large one I glued down flat. But I'm going to add this small one to the front of that large poinsettia. And I don't want to glue this one down flat. I want to give it a little bit of dimension. So the easiest way to do that is to get my cutter bee scissors, cut in along the petal lines, and create petals. Then I'm going to use my fingers and I'm going to curl those petals just to give them a little bit of a natural curl to them. And that's going to add a little bit of dimension to those flowers, a little bit of movement, and just make it look a little bit more interesting, a little bit less flat. If you like your flowers flat, that's totally fine. I like it when they have a little bit of a natural curve to it. It just gives it a little bit more interest in my opinion. And really, this could have been done with all of the flowers before gluing them down on the card, but I just did it with the one to save time, and I think it gives enough of dimension or enough of that effect that it's not as necessary on every single one of them. I have a sentiment here that was foiled and left over from a previous project, so I'm going to glue that on the card, put my acrylic block on there to hold it in place while I put some Glisten stickles in the center of those poinsettias just to give them a little bit of extra sparkle. It just ties in with the gold foiling and again gives it a little bit of extra sparkle, a little bit of texture in the center of those flowers. And then I let that sit to dry for a while. So here is the finished card, and once again, these petals don't look exactly like a poinsettia, but I think it gives off that vibe between a poinsettia and a Christmas mum, and I really like the way it looks, and it just gives you an idea to look at your dies and your stamps a little bit differently and look at the shape instead and see what else you can use them for. By having multiple ways of using each one of them, it gives them a lot more value, and isn't that what we all really want? Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fabulous day.